I spent 43 years beside my husband, and now my own son was standing in front of me, asking me to accept that Arthur had erased me with one signature. I heard my own voice echo across the marble lobby of Whitmore Packaging, louder than I intended, but Daniel barely looked at me. 3 weeks had passed since Arthur died after a sudden cardiac complication, and grief still made ordinary mornings feel unfamiliar. I had driven 12 miles through cold Ohio rain because the quarterly board meeting was the one routine I thought no one could take from me. I had attended those meetings for 18 years. I knew every receptionist, every framed photograph, every scratch on the long walnut conference table upstairs. But that morning, my access card flashed red. The young woman behind the desk, Jenna Parker, lowered her eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry. Your credentials were deactivated yesterday." Then Daniel appeared from the elevator. My son looked exhausted, his tie crooked, his expression carrying that careful softness people use when they have already decided something for you. Melissa stood several feet behind him, immaculate in a cream coat, holding a blue folder against her chest. "Mom," Daniel said, "we should talk somewhere private." Melissa stepped forward before I could answer. "Arthur changed the company documents before he passed." Her voice was calm, too calm. She opened the folder and handed me a photocopy. According to the amendment, Arthur had transferred his controlling block of Whitmore Packaging shares to Daniel and removed my voting authority as acting trustee. My name was still there, but stripped of control. At the bottom was Arthur's signature, Arthur J. Whitmore. For one terrible second, it looked perfect. The slant, the heavy downstroke on the W, even the way he finished the final E. My chest tightened, but not because I believed it. I looked lower. At the bottom left corner of the last page, there was nothing, just white paper, empty space. And suddenly, I remembered Arthur standing in our kitchen 2 months earlier, holding a stack of documents while the coffee maker clicked behind him. He had smiled strangely and said, "Evie, if you ever see my name on something I didn't sign, don't look at the name." At the time, I had laughed and asked what on earth he meant. Arthur never answered. Now Melissa was watching my face. "Evelyn," she said, "are you feeling all right?" Daniel touched my elbow. I pulled away. "When was this signed?" I asked. 11 days before Dad died," he said. Melissa quickly added, "He wanted everything settled." I looked at Daniel. "Were you there?" Silence. Just long enough to matter. Melissa closed the folder. "You should go home, Evelyn. This has been an emotional month." I left without arguing. That frightened me more than anger would have. At home, I placed my purse on Arthur's old desk and stared at the rain sliding down the window. Then the phone rang. Harold Bennett, our family attorney for 26 years, spoke before I could say hello. "Evelyn, Melissa showed you an amendment today, didn't she?" I gripped the receiver. "Yes." Harold went quiet. Then he asked, "Tell me one thing. On the final page, what was written in the bottom left corner?" "Nothing," I said. The silence on the line changed. "Then don't sign anything," Harold replied. "Because Arthur told me exactly what that empty corner would mean." Harold did not explain what Arthur had meant, and that unsettled me more than if he had simply said the document was fake. Not over the phone, he told me. "Bring me every paper Arthur signed during his final year. Contracts, letters, checks, anything with ink on it." I looked toward the hallway where Arthur's study sat with the door half open. For 3 weeks, I had avoided spending more than a few minutes in there. That afternoon, I stepped inside and turned on his brass desk lamp. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and the peppermint candies he kept in the top drawer. For one strange moment, I could almost feel him behind me, not as a frightening presence, but as if the room itself remembered him. Then the old mantel clock stopped. Exactly 2:17. I stared at it. Arthur had wound that clock every Sunday for 30 years. It had never stopped while I was in the room. I told myself it meant nothing and began opening drawers. Tax files, insurance statements, vendor contracts. Then I reached for the gray storage box marked 2025 Corporate. It was gone. I checked the cabinet twice, then the closet. Nothing. My stomach tightened. Only 3 people knew Arthur kept company records in that room. Me, Daniel, and Melissa. Before I walked out to call Daniel, I switched off the brass lamp and stood for a second with my hand on the door, forcing myself to remember that small, ordinary action. I called Daniel. "Did you take your father's corporate box?" There was a pause. "No. Why would I?" "Did Melissa?" His tone changed immediately. Mom, don't start accusing her. I almost apologized out of habit. Instead, I said, I'm asking a question. Daniel reminded me that Melissa had stopped by 2 days after the funeral to pick up a coat he had left behind. She had been alone in the house for perhaps 20 minutes while I was at church. When I told Harold, he asked me not to confront her. The next morning, I drove 6 miles to his office carrying a grocery bag filled with old checks, birthday cards, and business letters bearing Arthur's handwriting. Harold placed the disputed amendment beside them. There's something else, he said. The document claimed Arthur had signed before a notary named Rachel Coleman in Dayton. Dayton was more than 70 miles away. I remembered that date. Arthur had spent the entire afternoon at home with me. We watched a Cincinnati baseball game, ate turkey sandwiches, and complained because the temperature had climbed to 87 degrees in September. Harold called Rachel while I sat across from his desk. At first, she sounded certain. The seal number was hers. The notary registration was hers. Even the date looked familiar. But when Harold asked whether she remembered Arthur Whitmore, her confidence faded. I handle a lot of documents, she said. I can't say I remember him. That answer left us with nothing solid. By evening, I was back home, standing beneath the mantel clock. It still read 2:17, though I had wound it myself. Then the phone rang. Harold's name appeared on the screen. Rachel called me back, he said. His voice was lower now. She remembered the Whitmore paperwork. I held my breath. And Arthur? Harold hesitated. Evelyn, she says the person who brought those papers into her office wasn't Arthur. It was a woman. For several seconds after Harold said the word woman, I could hear nothing but the ticking of the kitchen clock behind me. Did Rachel describe her? I asked. Harold exhaled slowly. Not yet. She wants to check her appointment records before saying anything else. That caution should have comforted me. Instead, it gave Melissa room to move first. The next morning, Daniel came to my house carrying coffee and wearing the same concerned expression he had used in the company lobby. He sat across from me at Arthur's kitchen table and said, Mom, Melissa thinks you've been under too much stress. I almost laughed. Melissa thinks. Daniel rubbed his hands together. You forgot your dentist appointment last week. You called me twice about the board meeting. And now you're saying Dad's documents were falsified. There it was. Not an accusation. Something quieter. More dangerous. A story being built around me. I had spent most of my life making peace inside this family, smoothing over sharp edges before they could cut anyone. Now that habit felt dangerous. If I defended myself too loudly, Melissa could call me unstable. If I stayed quiet, she could call my silence proof. Melissa arrived 20 minutes later with a folder of forms she called temporary financial protections. She said Daniel could manage my accounts until things settled down. I did not touch the pen she placed beside my hand. Did you go to Dayton before Arthur died? I asked. Her face barely changed. Of course not. Daniel looked at me as though I had embarrassed him. After they left, the house felt unusually cold, though the thermostat read 72 degrees. I walked into Arthur's study and found the brass desk lamp glowing. I knew I had switched it off. Then the mantel clock, frozen at 2:17 for nearly 2 days, suddenly gave a single chime. Just one. I stood still. Arthur had always laughed when that old clock acted temperamental, but this did not feel random anymore. My eyes moved to the desk drawer beneath it. Inside was a business card Harold had given me years earlier for a forensic document examiner named Dr. Claire Donovan. By afternoon, Claire was studying copies of Arthur's genuine signatures beside the disputed amendment. She used magnification, pressure analysis, and scans so detailed I could see tiny breaks in the ink. Whoever made this knew his signature very well, she said. The proportions are nearly exact. My heart sank. So it's real? Claire shook her head. I didn't say that. Look here. She showed me the downstroke in Arthur's W. The pressure is unusually consistent. Natural signatures vary. This one behaves almost like an image transferred from an older sample. But she needed genuine handwriting from the same period to be certain. I remembered our anniversary card. Arthur had signed it only weeks before the date on Melissa's document. I kept it in a cedar box upstairs. When I opened the box, the card was gone. So were 2 handwritten notes Arthur had tucked beside it. Beneath them lay one folded scrap of yellow paper I had never seen before. Arthur's handwriting crossed the center in 3 hurried lines. My hands went cold as I read the last one. If they come looking for my signature, Evie, they'll take the wrong thing. Arthur's note changed the way I looked at every strange thing that had happened in his study. The lamp, the clock, the business card in the drawer. I had wanted to believe the house was somehow guiding me, but now another possibility felt just as unsettling. Arthur had known enough to leave a trail before he was gone. The next afternoon, Daniel called me from the parking lot outside Whitmore Packaging. His voice had lost its careful softness. "Mom, did you know Melissa was arranging a loan against Dad's shares?" I sat down slowly. "What loan?" "$480,000. He sounded ashamed saying the number. A lender had emailed him documents requiring his approval as acting shareholder. Daniel said he had never authorized the application. When he confronted Melissa, she told him it was only a contingency plan to protect the family business. But Daniel finally asked the question he should have asked weeks earlier. "Did Dad sign that amendment in front of you?" Melissa did not answer directly. She told him Arthur wanted the company kept inside the family. She told him I was grieving. She told him Harold was stirring up trouble. Daniel called me because, for the first time, those explanations no longer sounded like answers. That evening, Harold and Dr. Claire Donovan came to my house with something they had pulled from Whitmore Packaging's archived server. It was a vendor agreement Arthur had signed 3 years earlier. Claire placed the old signature beside the one on the disputed amendment. I did not need her magnifying glass. They were almost identical, not merely similar. The curve of the A, the pressure break in the W, even a tiny ink hesitation before the final E. Claire pointed to the same marks on both pages. "This wasn't imitated freehand," she said. "It appears to have been built from an existing signature image." My mind went straight to Melissa and the missing corporate box. But Daniel added one detail that made the room go silent. Months earlier, Melissa had asked him for an old scanned signature from Arthur's files, claiming she needed it to compare paperwork for an insurance audit. Daniel had sent her the vendor contract. He had never asked why. Then he remembered something else. 2 days after the funeral, he had seen the gray 2025 corporate box in the trunk of Melissa's car. She told him I had asked her to take old records back to the office. I had never asked her to take anything. I looked at my son and saw something painful in his face. Not innocence. Recognition. He had not forged anything, but he had made it easier because asking fewer questions had benefited him. Then the mantel clock chimed once from the study. We all heard it. Harold looked toward the doorway. "Evelyn," he said, "there's something I haven't shown you." From his briefcase, he removed a sealed cream envelope. My name was written across the front in Arthur's hand. Harold explained that Arthur had placed it in his private legal file with instructions that it remained sealed unless someone challenged the family trust. My fingers barely moved as I opened it. The first line made every other discovery feel small. "Evie, if you're reading this, Melissa has already tried to use my signature." I read Arthur's letter twice before I could make myself continue. His words were calm, almost unbearably calm. He wrote that months earlier, he had noticed Melissa asking questions about company shares, voting rights, and whether scanned signatures carried the same legal weight as originals. Arthur never confronted her. Instead, he called Harold. Together, they created one safeguard Melissa could see on paper but could not understand from a copy. Arthur formally executed a supplemental trust certification with Harold, making 3 forms of authentication mandatory for any later amendment involving the company shares. Arthur's signature, Harold's handwritten initials on the certification page, which served as the final page of the amendment, and a 4-digit number written by Arthur in that page's bottom left corner. Harold kept the signed original in his legal file. "The signature is the part they'll copy," Arthur wrote. "The corner is the part they'll notice too late." My breath caught. I saw that empty white space again. The page Melissa had placed in my hands at the company lobby. No number. No initials. Nothing. For the first time, I understood why Harold had sounded afraid on the phone after the board meeting. The empty corner was not a hunch. It was a warning Arthur had built into the paperwork itself. Harold opened the original trust file on my dining room table. There it was, for small digits in Arthur's handwriting. I reached toward them, but Harold stopped me. "Not yet, Evelyn. There's more." Dr. Claire Donovan confirmed that the disputed signature matched the 3-year-old vendor contract at a level no natural signature should. Same pressure break, same microscopic hesitation, same spacing. Daniel sat across from me, pale and silent. Then he finally spoke. "I gave Melissa that scan." His voice cracked. "Months earlier, She had asked him for Arthur's old signature, saying it was needed for an insurance audit. Daniel had sent the file without checking. I didn't know what she was doing, he said. I believed that part. But he had known she wanted control of the company. He had known he would benefit. And he had chosen not to ask. Before I could answer him, the mantel clock in Arthur's study began chiming. Not once this time. For times. Slow. Heavy. The clock still showed 2:17. Harold stared toward the hallway. Even Claire stopped speaking. For chimes. For digits. I felt the hair rise along my arms. Arthur, I murmured before I could stop myself. Then Harold's phone rang. It was Rachel Coleman. She had found her appointment log from the week the amendment was supposedly notarized. Melissa Whitmore's name was written beside the appointment. Not Arthur's. Rachel also remembered something else. Melissa had brought the document already signed. She claimed Arthur was too ill to travel and said she only needed Rachel to verify paperwork connected to the company. Rachel admitted she should never have stamped it without him present. The room seemed to shrink around me. We had the copied signature, the missing authentication, the false notarization, the $480,000 loan. Almost everything fit. Then Harold opened an email from the lender and went completely still. Evelyn, he said, look at the submission date. I leaned over his shoulder. The loan application using Arthur's supposedly transferred shares had been filed 9 days before Arthur died. Melissa had not invented this scheme after we buried him. She had started it while he was still alive, and Harold whispered that the application contained one attachment none of us had seen before. The attachment was a scan of Arthur's original trust certification page, but Melissa had made one mistake that no copied signature could hide. She had cropped the page before submitting it to the lender. The bottom left corner was missing. Harold enlarged the file on his laptop. The cut line was obvious. Melissa had not simply overlooked Arthur's 4-digit code. She had seen 4 unexplained numbers on the genuine certification page and assumed they were a private notation that might expose her altered copy, so she cropped them away instead of reproducing them. What she missed was their legal purpose. Harold opened the sealed original beside me. The number was 0417. April 17th. Not our wedding anniversary. Not Arthur's birthday. It was the day Arthur and I first met, 43 years earlier, at a church fundraiser outside Cincinnati. Nobody else knew that date mattered. Arthur had chosen it because Melissa could search records, copy signatures, and study legal forms, but she could not copy a memory she had never been told. That was the final piece. Harold filed the original trust and its supplemental certification with the Franklin County Probate Court, along with Rachel Coleman's statement, Claire Donovan's analysis, the archived vendor signature, the lender records, and the altered scan. At the hearing, I listened while the judge refused to recognize the disputed amendment because it failed the trust's required authentication and was supported by a notarization Rachel admitted had been improper. The lender froze the $480,000 loan immediately. Whitmore packaging stayed under the original trust. Arthur's controlling shares never passed to Daniel, and my voting authority as acting trustee remained intact. As part of the document turnover that followed, Melissa's attorney returned the gray 2025 corporate box, my anniversary card, and the 2 handwritten notes that had vanished from the cedar box. Seeing them again hurt more than I expected. They were ordinary pieces of our life, and she had treated them like tools. Daniel came to my house 2 days later. He did not bring coffee. He did not bring excuses. He sat at Arthur's kitchen table and said, I knew she wanted control. I just kept telling myself it would make life easier. I looked at my son for a long time. That is what hurt me most, I said. You did not need to forge your father's name to betray me. You only needed to stop asking questions. Daniel cried quietly. I did not rush to comfort him. I loved him, but love was no longer the same thing as surrender. Harold helped me change the company's governance rules so no single family member could move major assets without independent review. Daniel stayed in the trust, but trust itself would have to be earned again. That evening, I went into Arthur's study alone. The brass lamp was off. The mantel clock still showed 2:17. I finally opened the back panel and found something almost embarrassingly ordinary, a worn spring and a loose gear. Harold later told me Arthur had mentioned the clock needed repair weeks before he died. Maybe the stopping had been coincidence. Maybe the lamp had been an old switch settling. Maybe the business card had simply been where Arthur left it years ago. I wanted rational answers. I truly did. Then I set Arthur's original certification page on the desk and touched the 4 small digits he had written for me. 0417. At that exact moment, the broken clock gave one soft click and the minute hand moved forward. Just 1 minute. I smiled before I could stop myself. You always did like the last word, I said. I sat there until the room grew dark, thinking about how Arthur had protected me with ink, memory, and one empty corner. But the real gift was not the company. It was knowing that when everyone around me tried to make me doubt what I saw, the man who knew me best had already trusted me to see clearly.